Hello. The Divine Code reading for January 5th, pages 423 and 424. We are in the chapter An Accidental Killer's Obligation for Exile, Laws of a Blood Redeemer, and Cities of Refuge. Topic number 8. These cities of refuge are specifically those established by Jews in accordance with the Torah law. But Gentiles are not able to designate cities of their own to protect unintentional manslayers from the blood redeemers. Kings 10:1. It appears that Rambam holds that there are no cities of refuge for Gentiles on their own, but only those of the Jews, which therefore protect a ger toshav who lives in Israel with the permission of Torah law. And it is an obligation for Jews to assist him, as said by Rambam, Laws of Kings 10:12. In the Laws of Murderers, chapter 5, Rambam is referring to the existence of a city of refuge, a Jewish commandment, which includes the precedent that it must also be available to the ger toshav, Gentiles in Israel. This exclamation is also written in Kimdat Israel on Rambam, Laws of Kings, chapter 10, part 35. So the Torah law mandates that a certain number of cities are put aside as cities of refuge within Israel. And the Torah law does not designate, the Jewish people do not establish cities of refuge outside of Israel. This is a place that I would have to really disagree with the Divine Code. There are certain areas where the Divine Code, it needs further development, just to put it nicely. And just because there is no Torah commandment for the Jewish people to establish cities of refuge outside of the land of Israel, there is a Noahide commandment to establish dinim, to establish courts of law. And when you establish courts of law, the courts of law become the city of refuge. Now, in the Jewish system, the courts of law are also the cities of refuge. The courts of law are for capital cases, for murder or for unintentional murder. That court of law is in the city of refuge. And that's where the person has to go. The person is being told to run to the court of law. And the court of law is set up in the city of refuge. And the city of refuge basically becomes a penal colony. Well, I mean, only a handful of people, hopefully, are actually in there for that purpose, or Levites. But it becomes a location, a holding place for people that go there for that purpose. So the entire system this is how the court system is set up in the Torah, in this case. And we have to look at, okay, we have courts, we have a requirement for courts in the Noahide Code. And therefore the requirement for courts, that would be our city of refuge for the Gentiles. And we're required to establish it. So I'm not really sure to say there's no cities of refuge means that the Jewish people are not commanded to establish the cities of refuge. It could be said that the Jewish people to establish the courts of law. It's a requirement on the nations to establish the courts of law. And that's what's being said by there's no cities of refuge. It's not saying there's no cities of refuge. It's saying that the Jewish people do not establish cities of refuge in the nations. So the Divine Code needs further development in this area. It appears that a Gentile who does not want to go to exile, since he is not afraid of the blood redeemer, has no Torah law obligation to do so. However, if a Ger Toshav who lives in Israel accidentally kills, he must go into exile to live in a city of refuge, if there is one. There are two components of exile for an unintentional murderer, as explained in Or Shemeach on Rambam, Laws of Murderers 6:12, and Minhag Kinuk Commandment 4:10. 1. Atonement for sin, which is obligatory even if there is no danger from the blood redeemer, and 2. Protection from the blood redeemer. This can be viewed as part of the prohibition of murder, or as an obligation not to land with murder. See Rashi on Genesis 9:5, which he explains as, I, that is God, will demand the soul of man unless he goes into exile. This implies that even for Gentiles who murder, atonement can be obtained by going into exile. And if this is not done, there will be punishment from God. See Tractate Sanhedrin 37b. So I would suggest from this that and this is more in the laws of Dinam. So I'm not really sure why the cities of refuge and all that are even in the unit on murder. If he's not afraid, if the Gentile living in a nation is not afraid of the blood redeemer, there's no obligation to go into exile. I would suggest that if the court system needs to have a way of processing unintentional murder. That's manslaughter, where there's a certain level of culpability in the death of another person. The government needs to have rules on how to deal with this. And the person who falls in this category needs to follow the rules that the government, the local court system, establishes for dealing with issues of manslaughter. And it's not that he can just ignore it unless he lives in a poorly developed land that has a poorly developed court system that doesn't have rules on how to deal with manslaughter. I can't imagine such a system existing, but maybe it would. Then what's he supposed to do? He can't go to the court. Even if he goes to the court, they're not going to do anything with him. So he has to follow the laws of the land in this regard. And if the laws of the land allow for a blood redeemer, that's entirely up to the hands of the court system. It's not up to the hands of what's being explained here, but it's up to the hands of the court system to determine if the blood redeemer is going to be allowed in their country. And I'm not aware of any country that allows that. Then you follow whatever the courts have set up. And what exists in this halakha is a theoretical. If it were to go in front of a Jewish court, how would the Jewish court handle this case? The Jewish court would allow for the blood redeemer and would require the person to go to a city of refuge. And if there is no city, if the court system outside of the land of Israel could not establish a city of refuge, so this halakha does not have practical functionality because it's the halakha for the Jewish court, not the halakha for a Noahide court. And the Noahide court is what we're trying to determine what goes on in the Noahide law. So it's a little shoehorned how it's being done here. Topic number 9. The above refers to one Ger Toshav who kills another Ger Toshav unintentionally, or alternatively, a Gentile who keeps the 7 Noahide commandments outside of the land of Israel, who kills another Gentile outside of the land of Israel. This appears to be the opinion of Rambam in Kishnef Mishnah and footnote in the yesterday's footnote. But if a ger toshav unintentionally kills a Gentile who does not keep the 7 Noahide commandments, he is not required to go into exile. And the court will not allow the blood redeemer to kill or harass him. And again, we're referring to a court, a Jewish court under the Sanhedrin that would theoretically have jurisdiction in this area. But at the same time, there would be a secular court that would exist. So if he's in the land of Israel, that's how it would apply. If a ger toshav killed a idolater in the land of Israel, manslaughter, unintentional killing, then similar to the laws of the Jew, who would not be required to go into exile and would not be under threat from a blood redeemer in the land of Israel, that would also apply to a ger toshav who accidentally killed an idolater. But that's the law in the land of Israel. It would not be the law outside the land of Israel. Outside the land of Israel, again, would be however the court system sets up. Ritva on Tractate Malkut, page 9, and Minhakina, Commandment 410, part 9. This means that during the time the Jews are ruling, they do not let a redeemer harm a ger toshav who is living in the land of Israel. Nevertheless, there is no practical outcome of this, as there is no permission for a Gentile who does not keep the 7 laws to live in Israel, as explained in Rambam. Now, I mean, they could still be there. They don't have permission to be there, but they could be there. So it's theoretically possible. As explained in Rambam, Laws of Idolatry, chapter 10, if the blood redeemer is also a ger toshav, the court lets him know the law and warns him not to harm the ger toshav, accidental manslayer. So if you have 2 ger toshavs living in the land of Israel, and one of the ger toshavs has a family member who's an idolater visiting for the weekend. Not supposed to, but he visits for the weekend, and something happens, an accidental, the other ger toshav has an accident that he should have been more careful about, and the relative who's the relative of the other ger toshav unfortunately dies. The other ger toshav, the relative, cannot go after the first ger toshav, and the Jewish court would explain that to him. Topic number 10: a Gentile who has not accepted to follow the 7 Noahide commandments, who kills unintentionally, whether within the land of Israel or outside, is not protected by any cities of refuge. Therefore, a blood redeemer has permission to kill him even within a city of refuge. See Rambam Laws of Murderers 5:4. So the person that runs to the city of refuge. Okay, first of all, the question of whether or not there's cities of refuge outside the land of Israel, it depends on the local government, what they want to set up. I have a city of refuge less than a mile from my house. And if I was I stepped on someone's toe and he's chasing me, because he's angry and he wants to get me for stepping on his toe, I can run to the police station that's less than a mile from my house. I might be a little winded, but when I get there, but I could run to the police station and seek protection from the guy who's chasing me because I stepped on his toe. That's possible. And it exists in the judicial system. In most countries, there is a place the person can run to. So we have that. Now, the city of refuge, in this case, the police station, could choose whether or not to protect me. And similarly, in a Jewish city refuge, if a idol worshiper ran to the Jewish city refuge, the Jewish city refuge is going to intake, they're going to have an intake processing place, and the court that handles the intake processing is going to interrogate, discover the status of the person, and discover the circumstances involving the manslaughter. If the person qualifies in both of these cases, both his own status and the status of the accident, if he qualifies, then he is admitted into the city of refuge. If he does not qualify in either one of these two instances, then he is not allowed into the city of refuge. Now, if he runs into the city of refuge, I mean, these places are not, they don't have a moat around them. The guy could run in. The blood redeemer's chasing him. You still have to wait for the court system to process the guy. So I guess theoretically the guy is in the city of refuge, but if the court does not accept him into the city of refuge, then the blood redeemer could attack the guy in the city of refuge, I suppose, or they would toss him out and the guy would get him outside of the city of refuge, I suppose. So yeah, so if the guy is an idolater, or if it turns out that, well, if it turns out that it's a case of intentional murder, then the court system would handle it from there. And so the only case where the person would be at threat is if he does not qualify for admittance because he does not receive the Ger Toshav status, whether as a pre-existing Ger Toshav or as a pious among the nations who applies for Ger Toshav status. If the person wants to be in the city of refuge, he has to be following the 7 laws. If he's not following the 7 laws, then he doesn't qualify for the city of refuge. He should have gone to the local police department instead. So in that case, if the blood redeemer, if the person is excluded from acceptance into the city of refuge, then the blood redeemer would be able to go after him. Topic number 11. If a blood redeemer comes to kill a murderer, and the murderer fights back and kills the blood redeemer, the murderer is exempt from liability for the second death since he acted in self-defense, even though Torah permits the blood redeemer to kill him. As Mishnah Lemelech on Rambam, Laws of Murderers, end of chapter 1, based on Tractate Sanhedrin 82a. So this all kind of plays into the idea of the blood redeemer is not to kill the person. That's really not the purpose of the blood redeemer. The purpose of the blood redeemer is to chase the person into the city of refuge. If the person is seriously trying to get to the city of refuge, and the blood redeemer is a little too aggressive, then the person could argue that he is acting in self-defense. If the person is staying out is acting like nothing matters, and the Blood Redeemer shows up, and the murderer who's under threat decides to stand his ground rather than run to the city of refuge. I'm not sure if that would be considered a proper self-defense. Maybe, according to this, it would be. I don't know. I would have to see the logic to play out. But according to this, the argument is that that person, even in that case, the unintentional murderer would be allowed to. The unintentional murderer who is not trying to go into exile could still defend himself to the point of Blood Redeemer. However, another person may not kill the Blood Redeemer as a pursuer, since he has permission by Torah law to pursue and kill the murderer. And that was discussed in the chapter on the laws of self-defense. Rosh and Tractate Sanhedrin into chapter 9, Tor Koshin Mishpat 425, and Minha Kina commandment 296, part 27. So while the person would have the unintentional murderer who's under threat from the Blood Redeemer could defend himself, even to the point of killing the Blood Redeemer, a third party would not have permission to get involved, because it's really between, or he doesn't have the permission to get involved to the point of killing the Blood Redeemer. He could probably get involved, but not to the point of killing the Blood Redeemer. He could probably try to hold the guy back. But he does not have permission to kill the Blood Redeemer, because it's not a case of self-defense, and the Blood Redeemer is acting within his legal permission. Topic number 12 has a long footnote that goes into tomorrow's reading, so we'll do topic number 12 tomorrow. Thank you.